Great to see you again and welcome back, everyone. I'm Vladislav Novikov, and today I'm joined by Andriy Dobryansky, Director of Communication at the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. Andriy, really glad to have you with us again.
Thank you for having me on.
So let's try to explain for our viewers what's going on. Trump just congratulated Americans on 6 months of his presidency. Think they're happy about that?
Well, it depends who you ask. The polls are overwhelmingly in support of the president if you ask Republicans. I believe Republicans are, in terms of approve or disapprove of the president, he is at 89% of all Republicans who are polled in this country. He remains the most popular Republican president ever polled amongst Republicans. However, he is, vastly losing ground across the board with independents and obviously Democrats. Specifically, one of his high points has been immigration and his handling of immigration, and it has steadily gone from positive back in February, March to now over 50% being negative against his policies of deporting people, deporting children, deporting people who are married to American citizens, against the president's viewpoint that people born in this country should not be American citizens automatically. So there are plenty of things down the road for the president to lose support, but he has not, as a political animal, suffered any losses, especially in Congress. Almost everything that he's asked for has passed in Congress. Unfortunately, he hasn't passed that much legislation, but everything that he has asked for, even difficult votes, have gone through, and he has been able to get the majority of his party behind him, and that's all he needs right now.
But what about ordinary people? Are they happy? Is this what they expected?
Definitely not everything they expected. I believe that the immigration battles, the deportations, are something that people did not expect to see. The budget of the immigration enforcement officials go from $8 billion to $175 billion. That is something that has specifically been polled in the last 2 weeks, and people are not happy that now we have this massive, almost army of immigration officials. This will be the largest law enforcement entity in the United States, larger than the FBI, larger than any federal law enforcement agency, but very notably, without academies and training at the level of, say, the FBI. So people are a little wary of masked men with guns arriving to their churches, to social halls, rounding up people, seemingly without warrants. And the more these images spread online, I think the more it's going to hurt the president. We also have not yet had a full year of tariffs. In fact, many tariffs which were announced back in April didn't really come into effect because the government was trying to figure out how to actually levy these tariffs. So we probably need to wait till the end of the year to see where inflation is. Right now, inflation rose in the last quarter at the highest rate that it had for several years. So we're at 2.7% inflation for the consumer price index. If we get to 3 or 4% in this country, I know that's very low considering European inflation. But if we get to 3 or 4%, many economists state that the popularity will also take a hit.
Okay, the EU says it may give in to avoid Trump's new tariffs on August 1st. Will he really go through with it?
I believe the EU is probably one of the biggest sticking points for Donald Trump. And a part of it is that this is probably one of the most complicated agreements that he needs. He simply wants things to happen after he announces them. And when you're talking about the EU, yes, they have a central body to represent them, but it's still different nationalities, different countries must agree to this policy. This is why even the policy of arming Ukraine that he announced last week is a little complicated, because NATO does not have a budget. It is separate countries that need to find appropriations to pay for these things. So as far as the EU, I believe that the president would like this to happen sooner rather than later. But just like many countries, Japan over the last 24 hours has a political crisis where in the end, the prime minister will remain in his spot because no other politician wants to take that role while exports are declining because of U.S. tariffs. So in the end, President Trump will be looking for some victories. He has already declared victory, but in the end, he hasn't had any signed deals because, as we all know, at most he can get a framework agreement this year. But he really needs to have a finished deal to show to the American people.
And one more important topic, the Kremlin says Trump might meet Putin in Beijing this September if he comes to China. Do you think that could happen?
I think President Trump would love that. He is very much enamored with the spectacle. He is very much enamored with being shown in historical pictures. The man who went to the demilitarized zone in North Korea, between North Korea and South Korea. He's obviously, this is why he chose the Helsinki summit in his first term. He wanted to show a picture with the Russian leader, and much similar, because he's enamored with the pictures of the past, with the U.S. having summits with Soviet leaders, and very similarly, he's enamored with this vision of Nixon going to China and having relations open up there. He would like to do something similar, again, for the visual and historic purpose of that, to show that he went somewhere and he figured out a deal.
And one more, China says it will take action after the EU's new sanction on Chinese companies and banks. What might that mean?
Well, many things. For one, the negotiations haven't been going that well between China and the United States, China and the EU towards China's benefit. Many people in the United States, not many people, some economists were wondering whether the EU would turn towards China after the Trump tariffs, and it doesn't seem like China is making any headway there. We also see that China is able to put restrictions on rare earth minerals and other items that the United States does not want to stop at the moment. And so this is one of the reasons that trade negotiations began again with the United States and China when they met in Switzerland a few months ago. So right now, no entity is having much leverage with China. China is frankly more content with waiting out until there's a change in government in the United States and might just drag on these trade negotiations until the end of the Trump term.
In the EU, stuck between pressure from both China and the United States.
Yes, absolutely. And it's for Europe to figure out what the next steps are, in addition to the fact that obviously they're also going to be spending more money on domestic spending for military purposes. But I think one of the reasons that we saw countries like Italy, France, and others not want to immediately join this scheme by President Trump to pay the United States for weapons for Ukraine is because European countries know that domestic manufacturing of weapons inside their country is much better for their economy. So, some might go ahead with the purchase of weapons from the United States. Some might focus on new factories, new jobs for their people, and much more money going to their own domestic population with this increase of 5% spending for NATO. Senator
Graham said Putin U-turn is coming. Trump's really ready to kick your ass. Do you think Putin took that seriously?
I think it's been demonstrated that so far Putin has not been afraid of mocking President Trump, of disappointing President Trump. Every phone conversation ends in disappointment for President Trump. He is not able to move ahead in the way he promised to the United States or the world that he could solve many of these problems. And it almost seems that after every conversation, Ukraine is attacked even more. Most notably earlier this month when he had a conversation, they both had a conversation on July 3rd. And then we have those horrible attacks on the maternity hospital. We have the child being hunted down in Kherson on video. It's very puzzling as to why Putin seems to want to do this to President Trump. But in the end, we know that our enemy is their greatest asset is to sow chaos. So whether it's dividing Europeans amongst each other, dividing Europe amongst from the United States, or more specifically, dividing Americans against each other, for them, it's not so much who is president, just so much that there's so much chaos within our country that we can't develop a strategy where we all move ahead against Russia.
But you know, Graham reminds me of Medvedev, always making threats, if it's correct.
Yeah.
But if you say it too often, does it still mean anything?
I know. I've had this problem with all of my interviews this year because Lindsey Graham has been so sending out press releases, announcing his tariff plan. It's going forward. It's going forward. And frankly, there was just nothing on Capitol Hill in Congress that demonstrated that this was going to move forward up until this month. July was really a change when starting with the fact that the Defense Department and the people within the administration who are against Ukraine funding, they orchestrated this stop of weapons to Ukraine, and that really changed their fortunes. All of a sudden, people like Keith Kellogg, like Marco Rubio, others who understand the value of being coordinated against Russia and really taking this opportunity to help Ukraine knock off a big competitor of the United States, they moved forward, and this gave a chance for Senator Graham's sanctions bill. We saw hearings being planned. We saw movement in Congress, actual Senate deliberations on this, and almost as soon as that was announced, that got stopped last week because President Trump announced his own unilateral tariffs and sanctions, which will take 50 days, of course, but this is an entirely different plan from Lindsey Graham. And so at this point, everything seems frozen in Congress unless the United States activists, which I speak to on a regular basis, do enough to influence the Senate to get a hearing on this. I believe that, unfortunately, if Senator Thune is blocking this, we might have to wait until the vacation for Congress in August, where all of these senators and congressmen have town halls with their voters, and that's going to be the best time for activists who support Ukraine to really ask tough questions about why aren't we doing these sanctions now? Russia is attacking now. Why aren't we doing this now? And that's what I anticipate happening in a couple of weeks.
Okay, we talk about this topic later, and here is another serious topic. The next round of peace talks between Ukraine and Russia could happen in Istanbul on July 23 or 24. Could that lead to a ceasefire?
Well, Ukraine is ready for that ceasefire. Ukraine has been proposing many sorts of ceasefires from as far as early back as 2022. This is why Ukraine has even brought this topic up at the United Nations about making sure that we don't have munitions stored at nuclear power plants, that we don't have any hard artillery around energy plants, because that's a war crime. So we can at least start there. That's a proposition Ukraine has had. Ukraine is also okay with a 30-day unconditional ceasefire as proposed by President Trump. I believe that a ceasefire is something that we're likely to see this year. I just don't know if it's going to be one that will last beyond an initial period, because as we've seen numerous times, the enemy of Ukraine is one that does not keep to ceasefires. And especially when the war began in 2014, we all remember that there was an initial agreement in the fall of 2014, and it wasn't until the winter of 2015 that we actually had a more lasting ceasefire, and of course acknowledging the fact that over the course of the last 10 years this has never been a complete ceasefire. There has been daily gunfire across the line, and there actually you very well know how the defenders of the front line actually will tell you that for 8 years the front line was moving almost daily, a kilometer this way, kilometer that way.
In the next few months Russia want to attack. Trump says he want peace. Aren't this goal the opposite?
Yes, very much so, especially with this 50-day proposal that no new sanctions for 50 days. At the same time, as we heard that the conversation on July 3rd with President Putin said that that President Putin was ready to have an intensified attack on Ukraine over the next 60 days. Not to ignore also Ukraine's intelligence services, which have said that there are over 100,000 Russian troops that have been prepared to invade across several portions of the border into Ukraine, hoping to occupy new towns. I think, unfortunately, fortunately, but the political reality, not the political, the battlefield reality for Russia is that at best they are hoping to capture areas that are bombed out, like Pokrovsk and something around that area, maybe 2 or 3 occupied settlements. But this is far from being a major military victory. And at the same time, it seems like Ukraine is actually doing better because it's expanded the field of battle. It's not just talking about Ukraine's armed forces aren't just thinking about Donbas, Dnipro, or Sumy, Kharkiv. It's really the entire battlefield, especially what's happening in the Black Sea, especially what's happening on Russia's territory with our longer range drones, which are with our autonomous vehicles that can deploy drones in the Black Sea. We're really seeing an opportunity for Ukraine to levy some strategic hits against Russia. At the same time, all that Russia can do, I mentioned possibly they could, advance it a little further to occupy some towns that are already bombed out. But what they've been really focused on are civilian attacks. And that, I believe, is what the coalition of the willing with Europe or with the Trump deal needs to be addressed ASAP. We need to stop the civilian killing. And that's happening daily, as you know.